I'm Michael Martinez, author of the Middle-earth blog on zenite.org. The discussion you're about to listen to was generated by Google's NotebookLM. The AI hosts are talking about my article for the Middle-earth blog titled, Why Did J.R.R. Tolkien Write So Little About the Second Age?
Hey, ever find yourself looking at Middle-earth's massive history and, wondering about the ages before Frodo and the Ring?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much there.
Well, today on the deep dive, we're focusing on something specific. This idea that J.R.R. Tolkien didn't actually write very much about the Second Age.
That is a common thought, isn't it? Like it's just this sort of vague period before the Third Age really kicks off in The Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. And that question, why did Tolkien supposedly write so little? That's what we're going to unpack today.
Okay.
We're using a really interesting post from the Middle-earth and JRR Tolkien blog by Michael Martinez as our guide.
Martinez.
Yeah.
He usually has some insightful takes.
He does. So our mission basically is to dig into this whole perception. Is it true? How much did Tolkien write about the Second Age? We want to get a richer understanding than maybe the surface impression gives.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So the blog post jumps right into that main question about the why.
Yep, straight in. Martinez starts by acknowledging that, a lot of Tolkien scholars do think there's not much Second Age stuff compared to the Third.
And what's the reasoning they usually give?
Well, the thinking often goes that the Second Age was kind of a later idea, maybe even a bit of an afterthought.
An afterthought, really?
Sort of. The idea is that the Second and Third Ages weren't really, fully conceived or fleshed out until Tolkien actually agreed to write a sequel to The Hobbit. That was back in late 1937.
Okay, so before that commitment, those ages were less defined.
Pretty much, yeah. Still largely unformed stretches of time in his mind, according to that view.
That does put a different spin on it, thinking of these vast ages as later developments.
It does. But Martinez quickly pivots. He puts forward his own view pretty strongly.
Which is?
That Tolkien actually wrote extensively about the Second Age over the next 35 years of his life. He says he's often surprised when people say there's not much material.
Interesting. So he thinks the perception is just wrong.
Basically, yeah. And he suggests why people might have gotten that impression.
Okay, I'm curious. Why does he think that?
He points to the Tale of Years in the back of The Lord of the Rings. You know, the timeline appendix.
Mm-hmm. It's useful, but concise.
Exactly. It's brief. And Martinez makes a great point here. Most of the historical outline we have for the Third Age also comes from that same Tale of Years.
Oh, that's a really good comparison.
Right. So if you only looked at that appendix, you could just as easily argue there isn't much written about the Third Age either, outside the main story.
That's smart. It really shows how relying just on the appendices gives you a limited picture for both ages, really.
Absolutely. Which naturally leads us to where we can find more Second Age stuff, beyond just the appendices.
Right. So where do we look first after the appendices themselves?
Well, the appendices were the starting point, obviously. Martinez notes they were the main source for over 20 years after they came out in 1956.
Yeah, until the Silmarillion finally got published in 1977. That's a long time.
It is. And he points out, more time has actually passed since the Silmarillion came out than that initial period when the appendices were all most people had. Kind of puts it in perspective.
It does. Okay, so then the Silmarillion. What parts are key for the Second Age?
Martinez flags two main sections of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, which kind of bridges the eras, and the Akallabeth, the downfall of Numenor.
Ah, yes. The big one for the Second Age.
Definitely. Those gave readers way more detail about Numenor's rise and fall and more context for what was happening on the mainland in Middle-earth itself.
But still maybe not exhaustive.
Right. Even Martinez admits the detail there could still feel a bit skimpy compared to, say, the First Age legends and the rest of the Silmarillion.
Okay, so the Silmarillion added a lot but wasn't the final word. Where next?
This is where it gets really interesting for the deep divers among us. The letters of J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh, right. His correspondence.
Martinez calls them a treasure trove. Apparently, lots of little historical details and nuances stayed hidden away in those letters for years.
And they shed light on the Second Age specifically. How so?
Well, several letters apparently go into detail about events from the First and Second Ages. Things like the forging of the Rings of Power.
Crucial stuff.
And this is really fascinating. Martinez says even late in life, like in his final year, Tolkien was still tinkering with the history of Galadriel and Celeborn.
Wow. Still revising.
Yeah, and hints of these changes, these evolving ideas, pop up in his letters. It shows his letters weren't just casual notes. They were part of his active creative process for the Second Age.
That's amazing. A glimpse into his working mind right near the end. Are there specific letters Martinez points to?
The big one, he says, the most important for Second Age historians, is number 131. That's the long one to Milton Waldman, his potential publisher at the time.
Ah, the famous Waldman letter, explaining the whole scope.
Exactly. But he also lists others with useful snippets, numbers 144, 153, 156, 174, 176, 183, 200. And then he just says many more.
So it's scattered, but adds up, like assembling a puzzle.
Precisely. Okay, next big source.
What comes after the letters?
This is the one Martinez calls the Mother Lode. Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth.
Right, Unfinished Tales. The title alone suggests more depth. What's key in there for the Second Age?
Oh, a lot. There's the detailed description of the island of Numenor itself.
Geography, culture.
Yeah. Then you have the actual story, Aldarion and Arendis, the mariner's wife. Really poignant.
I remember that one. Very different feel.
It is. Plus, there's the complex, sometimes contradictory history of Galadriel and Celeborn again.
The different versions.
Yes. And the line of Elros, tracing the kings of Numenor. And it's not just the main text. Martinez stresses the endnotes, and appendices and unfinished tales are packed with more info.
Right. Christopher Tolkien's notes add so much context.
They really do. Martinez estimates it all adds up to about 100 pages of really in-depth Second Age material, including sort of additional stories tucked away in those notes.
100 pages. That's substantial.
Yeah.
Definitely pushes back against the not much written idea.
Absolutely. It's a huge chunk of focus material. Okay, one more key text.
Which is?
The Peoples of Middle-earth, Volume 12 of the History of Middle-earth.
Right at the end of the home series. What's special about that one for the Second Age?
Its main value here is that it contains stuff that was written for and almost included in the Lord of the Rings appendices, but got cut late in the process.
Oh, wow. So like nearly finished material.
Exactly. It's a peek behind the curtain of Tolkien's final editorial choices for the appendices. Martinez does caution it also includes some earlier drafts and rejected texts.
Typical of the home series.
Right. But he says it still gives unique insights, not just Second Age, but also touches on the First and even hints of the Fourth Age. So a really useful book for researchers, even with the mix of material.
Okay, so gathering all that appendices, Silmarillion, letters, unfinished tales, peoples of Middle-earth. What's the overall conclusion from Martinez?
His final thought is, I think, really compelling. He basically argues, look, if you ignore the main story of the Lord of the Rings.
Right, the War of the Ring narrative itself.
Then there actually aren't that many full stories written about the Third Age either, outside of that main plot. Most of its history comes from, again, timelines and summaries.
That's a really interesting way to frame it.
It is. He suggests we arguably learn just as much, maybe even more, about the Second Age from Unfinished Tales and Peoples and Middle-earth as we do about the Third Age from comparable supplementary texts.
That totally shifts the perspective, doesn't it? We're so focused on Frodo and Aragorn that maybe we overestimate the narrative depth of the rest of the Third Age history and underestimate the Second?
I think that's exactly his point. And he uses this great little comparison to drive it home.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
He suggests we probably know more details about the friendship between the dwarf Narvi and the elf Celebrimbor in the Second Age.
The Doors of Durin connection.
Than we do about a Third Age character like, say, Queen Beruthiel, the one with the cats.
Right. She's just this very obscure footnote, really. That is a telling comparison.
It really highlights the surprising depth that is there for the Second Age, if you know where to look.
Yeah, it flatly contradicts that old idea that Tolkien just skipped over it or left it thin.
So, yeah, wrapping it up, the big takeaway is maybe the Second Age seems less prominent because the Lord of the Rings focuses elsewhere. But Tolkien actually did create a pretty substantial body of work about its history. It's just, scattered across different books.
Right. Not in one neat package, but definitely there. And those key sources, again, are the Lord of the Rings appendices.
The Silmarillion, especially a Calibeth.
The letters, unfinished tales, the mother list.
And the Peoples of Middle-earth for those extra bits.
A pretty solid reading list for anyone wanting to dive into that era.
Absolutely. It really makes you reconsider things, doesn't it? Like, does knowing all this material exists change how you think about the Second Age? Or does it spark new questions for you about Middle-earth?
It definitely does. And, thinking about something Martinez mentioned from a blog commenter, this idea about the kingdom of Arnor in the Third Age.
Oh, right. The relative lack of detail there.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If Tolkien did put so much effort into developing the Second Age, as we've discussed, why did he seem to, as the blogger put it, turn his mind's eye away from Arnor later on?
That's a great question to leave people with. Where did Tolkien choose to focus his creative energy and why? Definitely food for thought.
For sure.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive on the Second Age writings. Hopefully it's given you a clearer picture of this really crucial period in Middle-earth's history. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thank you for listening to this audio analysis of my article. You may have noticed that the AI host mispronounced the name of Celeborn. And anyone who has read The Nature of Middle-earth knows that even more material concerning the Second Age has been published since I wrote that article a few years ago. The Middle-earth blog on znight.org has published over 1,000 articles, including my original essays about Tolkien and Middle-earth from the early 2000s, as well as interviews with Tolkien scholars and some creative pieces in the Middle-earth Unplugged section.